Liter evaporator H2O's open house here. Yeah, I hope everybody had a good lunch. Good for nap time now in our afternoon class. My name is Nick Wendel. Don't seem to get as cold, so basically our winters seem like good springtime weather that we can be making syrup. And that's kind of hard to when to pull the trigger, when to make that choice, when to go out and tap those trees. Quite often, another thing that tends to be an issue with especially smaller producers is they will watch what I call big producers, and when I say big, I'm not trying to hold on anybody, but somebody with 20, 30, 100,000 taps. It takes them weeks and weeks and weeks to tap the trees. So they often will start in December and tap trees. You'll have a small hobby producer that sees that. They have 300. Well, geez, the professionals are tapping, I better go tap too. That doesn't mean that's the right time for you to go drill trees. Simply because you have the opportunity to take your time and do it in a day or 2 days or 3 days. You don't need to tap in December and risk, aging holes out because you tapped too early. So that's one of the first things we'll talk about is how long does it take you to tap? Is it a situation where you're a few hundred taps, you tap by yourself, you can get them done in 2 days? It's pretty easy to look at a forecast and make a choice that, we want to do it next week, we want to wait 2 weeks, we want to, whatever the situation might be for your situation. If you're 10,000 taps and you have 2 guys that you trust to tap, it's going to take you a little while. You need to start sooner. You need to tap in some conditions that may not be perfectly ideal. So that's a factor to take into account here. Probably the main thing that I'm going to recommend to start is be ready. And what that's going to come down to is January 1st, for most all of us, we need to be ready. And by ready means what spouts are you using? Okay, are you pushing new spouts on, adapters? Whatever spout you're using, if you don't already have them pushed on your drop lines or in your sugar house, they need to go buy them. Don't wait until, I want to tap February 15th and you show up to your dealer and they don't happen to have the exact ones you want in stock. Have the spouts. Have your drill bits. Know where your batteries are for your cordless drills. Do you need a new cordless drill because you dropped one last year? Be ready. Did you make improvements this year? New tanks, new RO, new plumbing, etc. Have it ready. Okay? I'm just as bad as anybody else in this room. I'm sure we've all been there to where, I got time to do that project this winter. Time to plumb that extra line into the RO this winter. It gets done after the second run. That's my normally, the old stuff works, we're going to use it, I'll have time, and I do it a week into the season. Be ready. That's the focus at this point. I'm not saying that everybody needs to tap January 1st, but you need to have everything in place so that you can. That way you don't get caught with your guard down. Quite often, 2 of my customers out my area this year that had, I will say, the worst season out of all my customers just weren't ready to tap when they needed to. And they missed half the season just because they weren't prepared. So that's the biggest thing to take away. Making that choice when to tap, though, that's the next thing. Figuring out roughly how long it's going to take. A little bit of advice that we had trouble with a couple years ago is good help to tap. The single most important step of making syrup is where you drill that hole and making sure that you do a good job doing it. Okay? You can have the most expensive equipment in the world. You can buy the best vacuum pumps, the best tubing, the biggest tanks, fastest RO, cleanest evaporator. If every hole you drill is too close to an old hole or not deep enough, or crooked, or oval, or etc. You overdrive all your spouts, you're not going to get much sap. All that expensive equipment doesn't mean anything for you. So that means take your time when you're drilling holes, and don't necessarily just, the neighbor's brother's stepson wants to work, give him a drill, he can drill holes. And if he's never done it before, he can't be just by himself drilling holes. You need to train, you know. Anybody that taps with me, even my cousins that have tapped for 4 or 5 years, when we start the day out, everybody, hey, this is what I want. You know, because they just assume that what worked for the last 10 years is what I want. I might have changed my mind. We're not driving as deep this year. Different spout, different color, different adapter, etc. We want to assess this different. We pattern tap personally, so we find last year's hole, we move to the right, we move to the right, every year we move to the right. So it takes a little time to find that old hole. You don't find it and you end up tapping right over it, not going to be a good producing spout. So take that into account, that you don't want to rush. Quite often everybody, oh geez, sap's running, the neighbor's tapped, the guy down the street's already got 200 gallons of sap or syrup made, we need to hurry, we need to go now, now, now. So they're rushing to drill their holes, that's when you make mistakes. So being ready, being prepared, and factoring in to take your time and do a good job. If that means that, you know, 2 people do all your tapping, then factor that time in. So figure out how long it's going to take you to tap, you know, whether you're 200 taps or 200,000 taps. Figure that time frame out and plan that you can be done tapping by your tapping goal, or your done goal. And that's why the big guys start tapping in December. Keep in mind that they may have 100,000 taps, 200,000 taps. Even with a large crew, they're tapping their first hole to their last hole drilled might be a 2-month period. And if they start tapping the 1st of March, like some of you might expect, they're still not done drilling now, you know, and the season's over. So that's why they do tap early. And don't get discouraged by you know, jumping the gun because of them. Areas are going to change a lot of this too. You know, if you have a woods that's a, you know, southerly facing woods, tap that woods first. It'll be running earlier. A north-facing woods, if it's in a valley, higher elevation changes that too. Focus on your warm woods first, get them done, then factor into the cold woods. Different regions, states even, you know, typically even with Leader and H2O as a supplier, they know that, you know, they've got to get taps down to the southern states first. Pennsylvania, Virginia tap long before Vermont and Maine do. So prioritize that area. And, you know, you may see on Facebook, Facebook is an amazing tool for people conversation in this industry. But it's kind of discouraging when, you know, even in Western New York where I am, looking at Facebook and, oh, so-and-so's tapping or so-and-so's tapping. You don't know where they're from. They're in Virginia. They're in Tennessee sometimes. You know, there's southern areas that have hobby producers making syrup. And they're making great syrup. But they're also done before I even drilled holes. It's just their season is earlier. But it's easy to get excited when you see that kind of stuff. So always keep in mind when you do talk to, you know, other producers or reading their posts, take into account where they might be located. You know, we were halfway through our season and I see people, oh yeah, out drilling holes. They were in Canada. They hadn't even had a run yet. And it just, keep that in mind. So it's not as easy just to pick a date and go. My next recommendation is extremely controversial, is watch the forecast. Okay, now I was talking through some ideas for this talk last night at dinner with some other customers and some friends, and you know, I said, you got to watch the weather. And one person said, oh, you trust the weatherman? I go, no, I don't, not at all. Long-term forecasts are extremely hard to bank on. And actually the last 2 seasons, both, when you looked at a 30-day forecast, they were completely wrong. It looked like we were going to have 30 more days of winter, so I wasn't in a rush. And then we get a week into it and all of a sudden, click, everything's above freezing. So try to find something that's reasonably reliable. The joke last night was the best weather forecast is, you sometimes see those signs at a craft store, it's like the weather rope. If it's wet, it's raining. If it's this way, it's windy. If it's white, it's snowing. If it's gone, it's a tornado. That's the weather forecast you can trust. It doesn't help us for tapping trees. But at the same time, you may set yourself a goal of, my area, last year I should have tapped in the middle of January. So next year I'm going to tap in the middle of January. If your long-term forecast shows single-digit temperatures for the next 2 weeks, wait. Unless it takes you that long to tap. Quite often we have so many producers that have buckets. They have, gravity flow tubing. You don't want to tap those way too early, and if they've got 200 buckets, don't tap those in single-digit temperatures. You don't need to. Don't set yourself up. So things like that to factor in. We'll talk real quick on choices when it comes to something like that. So buckets obviously and gravity flow tubing have a very narrow window of super effective sap collection. We want to drill those as close to prime time as we possibly can. So keep that in mind. Vacuum and tubing, a tight closed system, can be tapped for a very longer period. For instance, there was a gentleman on Facebook that a lot of people were following. He tapped mid-December, and everybody was getting excited on it, and he did a very good job of explaining that I'm tapping this early because I'm going to keep my vacuum pump running, regardless of temperature. And he even had a couple posts of some nasty windstorms that we had in January, and he's out fixing the leaks because those leaks on that were going to ruin his season if he didn't get them taken care of right away. So it's important to keep tap hole sanitation in mind if we're going to try to tap that early. You can't tap early holes in December and expect to make them into April at all if you're not going to be worried about keeping vacuum on them, keeping things clean, using new spouts every year, check valve spouts. I'm a believer in check valve spouts. I will admit that they're not every single year they are going to be their full benefit, but they're an insurance policy on the long seasons. They're an insurance policy when your vacuum pump goes down. Power goes out. I got electric vacuum pumps. I turn them on, they stay on from the time I drill holes to the time I pull taps. I control when that switch is turned on, turned off. I can't control when the power goes out though. Power goes out, what am I supposed to do? I suppose I can have a generator. Probably what I should do, but that's a big cost for maybe it's going to go out. Even a generator wouldn't hurt though. I had one situation this year where our tree went across a wet dry line. Vacuum went to zero. Pump's still running. Vacuum's at zero. So that's where check valves are a huge gain to keep that sap from going back to the tree. You drill the hole, the clock is ticking on that time frame. The colder the temperatures, clock slows down. New spouts slows the clock down. Check valve spouts slows the clock down. So things to factor in. Keep in mind the type of spouts you're using, how you're going to run your system is all very important to trying to keep the holes open longer if you're going to tap longer. Okay? So in our situation, I mentioned when I tapped this season, I wasn't quite completely ready yet. I have 3 different woods this past year that I tapped, and this is the first year I've had a very, very good one. We've always kept track of how much sap we get, but this year I had a good meter. Every gallon, everything gets hauled into my sugar house. I'm not one of those lucky sugar makers where everything runs to the sugar house. I haul everything in, but it gives me the opportunity to track to the gallon every woods to a T, and we kept very good track of it this year. And so the big woods got tapped first, which against my earlier suggestion, it was actually my cold woods. The reason I tapped the cold woods first is I had lots of help that weekend. We went and tapped the big woods because I had lots of help. But we tapped the cold woods first and the sap started running. I didn't have a chance to get the 2 smaller warm woods tapped right away because I had so much sap, we just kept going. Now about halfway through that first run, I said, we're just going to wait on those other woods. I want to run a test. I want to do an experiment here. I mean, there's different places do all sorts of research over the years. This is going to be kind of unprofessional, but I want to keep good track of our tap counts. Because even at that point, we tapped that first woods the 1st of February. There had been a couple runs in January that I could have gotten that we were already thinking we missed. We missed the January runs. And we're already thinking that these two smaller woods, we might have already missed this big run. Now the first run that we got on our main woods was about a 5-day warm-up, no freezes. And we got over 7.5 gallons of sap per tap in that first 5 days. And then it froze up for 10 days. And we got the other two smaller woods tapped. And we thought there's no way they're ever going to catch up. So very high tech here. I have my foam board. No fancy slideshow, I apologize. But I did a graph chart. So on this side here, we have gallons of sap per tap, okay? In 2s, 2, 4, all the way up to 35. And on the bottom here, I did a tally every week on my chart of what we had gotten. So these all have similar setups as far as vacuum, all check valve spouts, fairly similar as far as tubing age. Not exactly, but it's not like I have a brand new system and a 10-year-old system. They're all pretty well mixed as far as average to be pretty well set. The biggest difference is that this is the blue is my colder woods, and the green and the yellow are my warmer woods that got tapped later. So you can see here we start out at 0, come up that first week, that's 7.5 gallons of sap per tap. We freeze up for that 10 days. The two smaller woods got tapped just as soon as it got warm those next couple days. And you can see as the weeks go on, by the time we got to March 10th, they were within a couple gallons of each other, okay? Now I'm not going to promise you that this is always the case. One of the reasons that these smaller woods caught up as quick as they did, they were warmer woods compared to the cold one, okay? So I will give this instance that case, but they caught up. So some people may think that I missed the first run with my cold woods, but the fresh holes performed better than these holes that were already 2 or 3 weeks old at that point. So don't beat yourself up too much. If the neighbors got a run, the neighbors got 2 runs before I did. In the right year, they'll catch up, okay? And that's by judging by gallons of sap per tap. Now we did catch a couple instances here. For instance, like this yellow went real high. That was a cooler week where the warm woods did extremely well, where the couple other ones not quite so much. All said and done in the woods, my coldest end of the year, I got 33.25 gallons of sap per tap out of my biggest woods, which is the blue line. And you can see that colder woods actually gave me sap the last week where the other 2 were done, but not that much. A gallon per tap was all we got. 34, almost 35 gallons and 37 gallons of sap per tap. So for the people that wonder about vacuum 24/7, check valve spouts, stuff like that, those are my results. There's numbers thrown around the industry all the time of, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, 6 pounds per tap. Those numbers for me aren't as important because they're very much dictated by sugar content. You have some people that get 25 gallons of sap per tap and make 6 pounds. This call it a 35 average that I have, gave me 5.8 pounds. So I was over half a gallon, but a lot of my late sap around this area was 1.2%. It was, which is typically late season sap for me is that low. It was nothing different, but it takes a lot of sap to make a gallon of syrup at that point. But this I'd like to demonstrate that at least my woods this year, my later holes didn't hurt me, okay? So they did catch up. So don't beat yourself up too much. If it meant you do a good job drilling holes because it takes you a week longer, well worth it, that some of those holes missed the first run. So that was one big thing that I'd like to point out. And make good choices when it comes to the spouts that you're using, and use them correctly. Don't overdrive them, don't underdrive them. And a lot of that is very tricky to figure out. It's, try it. If you're breaking spouts, obviously you're pounding too hard. If you can't get them out of the tree at the end of the season, that was too hard. If they're falling out with every freeze, that's something to factor in. So, we'll talk real quick a little bit, recommendations on, I mentioned some of these woods are mixed as age. When we talk about tap hole sanitation, taps are one of them. Industry standard, pretty much for the most part, people are replacing their spouts almost every single year. Professional research has found that it more than pays for the spout in added production, so well worth it. Check valve spouts, I feel, are worth the extra 25 cents. So in most cases, a spout's going to cost you 20, 22 cents. Check valve spout's going to be 40, 45 cents. Your additional 25 cents. If you look at sap value, the value of a gallon of sap's about 25 cents. If you get 1 extra gallon, check valve's worthwhile. Okay? Even if you don't, it's like an insurance policy. Most of you have insurance on your vehicles to come here. You plan on using that insurance today? I hope not, but you have it. So my feelings on those fittings. Those get replaced every single year. Drop lines, I'm going to recommend a 3-year rotation without check valves, 5 to 7 with check valves. Replacing drop lines is normally around the cost of $1, depending on fitting and tubing choice. You'll see that come back in production. Customers that replace a drop lines in a woods typically see higher production on that compared to their older drop lines. And you don't have to do the whole woods. You can do sections of it. If you've got one big woods and you don't want to have to replace the whole thing every time, do a third of it every year and keep rotating through. Lateral lines, I've got a mixture of lateral lines in my woods. Some of these lateral lines in this case were 15 years old. Some of them are 5, some of them are 3, and everywhere in between, to be honest with you. Lateral lines, I don't think have as much influence on production. They can, depending on backflow and stuff like that, they can definitely, but it doesn't seem to notice in my production as much. Recommendations I have on that, though, in leased property, half-year lease. If it's a 10 or 15-year lease, 5 to 7 years, 10 years sometimes, think about replacing laterals. And that isn't always about, how clean the laterals are. We have new fittings, we have different tubings. The squirrels seem to like older tubing better. The new tubing in the woods tends to be the least amount of maintenance. So if I can have less leaks because I've replaced tubing, replaced problem areas, that's going to be a better season for me. Main lines typically, I haven't had to replace them yet. We leave them up. They work good. I will add to that, I am washing tubing. Industry is not a lot of people doing it anymore. Unpopular opinion in some cases, but I am still washing tubing. We wash with vacuum. We pull the tap out of the tree. We suck a sanitizing solution down the line. We're using a product called hydroxysand from Hydrite Incorporated. It is a hydrogen peroxide peracetic acid blend. It's the USDA approved food safe sanitizer. Works extremely well, 30-second contact time to kill bacteria, and leaves no residue. After about 30 days, depending on the strength you're mixing it, after 30 to 60 days, turns to pure water. So squirrels don't go after it. Nothing seems to bother it. We've had very, very good luck with it. Early sap is just as clean as any other sap. The real gain that we've had with this cleaning is after our first freeze. Typically a tubing system, you'll get sap, fills up, you get a hard freeze that, first couple days in, that ice in them lines scrubs all sorts of gunk out of your lines, and it plugs up extractors, plugs up releasers. You find it in your tanks. I have very little. There's some, a little, but not nearly as bad as I get pictures from my customers going, oh my God, what's in my tanks? Not mine. And then they tell me that they don't have time to wash, but yet they're struggling to keep the screens on an extractor clean today. I don't have to worry about it. So my take on it, again, it's unpopular opinion with some people. I come with the poultry side of my business, being a poultry farmer. I work in food service. I like things clean. I have a USDA inspector that inspects me every single day. And she likes things clean, so I like things clean. I like my tubing clean. So just my advice. I don't think that's going to be a huge difference when it comes to, seeing an extra 10 gallons of sap per tap. No. But you got to go pull them taps out of the trees anyways. Takes you just a little bit longer to suck a little solution down them, in my feeling, my take. So that's my advice. Talking about freezing, making your choice when to tap. All that stuff in the lines coming down. Your choice to tap early means a lot more than just picking the right spout. Now, we had a situation a few years ago. We had a big warm up in January. And the long-term forecast was calling for February to be sub-zero. Customers called me up, should I tap, should I tap? If you think you're ready, go for it. If you think you're prepared for the freezing weather that's in the forecast, go for it. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Most of the ones that decided to go tap called me the second week of February when it was 15 below zero, asking me what they're supposed to do with the syrup that's left in their flue pan. My tanks are froze, this pump froze, this broke, this line's froze up, I don't know when it's going to thaw out. My flue pan's froze, I don't know if I'm going to split a flue. You need to be prepared. When you tap trees, you're signing up for that possibility of freezing temperatures and everything that goes with it, okay? Now, it may just sound simple. Oh, got to put all my tanks indoors, I got a heated sugar house. That's not as easy as it sounds either. So keep that in mind. We'll get to the too warm here in a second, but if you're going to tap early, be prepared for draining sap out of tanks. You may get a small run of a couple 100 gallons. Not worth it for you to handle it. You're going to run it on the ground, because if it becomes a giant ice chunk, that's going to be a bigger pain to deal with when it does finally warm up. So keep factors like that in mind. You need to be able to drain lines, drain pumps. All your stuff still needs to be washed, even though it's cold out. You could have your hauling tank. It's cold out. Nothing's growing in there. No, bacteria is still growing. It's growing slow, but it's growing. So keep things washed out in a freeze up like that. When you get to your RO machine, that's the next one. If you're using a reverse osmosis, this time of year, right now it's summertime, all our machines are all washed, put away, storage solution in them for a long period of time. Your machine sits for 7, 10, 12 days in a freeze up in a nice warm room. Bacteria is growing. If you're going to tap early, if you're going to be shut down for a week for a freeze up or more, be prepared to wash the machine. Put it into a storage solution. And then everything that comes with that after. You put in the storage solution, you're going to wash and rinse before you go back to sap. If you don't, you'll smell it in your machine. If you don't put it in storage solution, your machine will smell horrible. It happens. But these are factors you need to be ready for. If you're prepared for it, you got some permeate you can store indoors, rinse the machine out, wash the machine after storage solution, after a week, 2 week, 3 week freeze up, go for it. Evaporator is our next one, okay? So quite often, people leave. It's common that, we boil today, what's left in the evaporator, we boil tomorrow. We boil 3 days later, we boil next week. If you have a long extended period of freezing, that sap in your pans will not freeze solid, but if it gets cold enough, it could possibly do some damage in the flues, in your float boxes, and etc. Heating your sugar house seems like a great option until bacteria starts growing a lot. Okay, so again, be prepared for what that might be. Is that, in some people's, like to drain their whole rig out into a small tank, into syrup barrels, roll them out somewhere cold, let them freeze, let them worry about them, thawing them out later. That might be an option. I had a customer do that this year. The problem was our long freeze up, this 10-day freeze up that we had right here, was mid-20s. Sap didn't run, but it really wasn't super cold either. That half-boiled sap still went bad. Even though it was below freezing, that half-boiled sap still went bad at the 20-degree temperatures. If it was in the evaporator, it definitely would have went bad. Okay? So the next option that you have is clean the rig out. Push water through the rig. Boil a little longer, push them with some water through. Not the most fuel efficient option. I have some customers that are not, if that evaporator's running, they're making syrup, there's no option, we're not wasting fuel. Be prepared to possibly take that sap that's in that evaporator and just dump it down the drain and not have to deal with it after 2 weeks. You know, you have to make these choices or be ready to make these choices if you're going to tap trees early. So, again, I'm hopefully not disappointing anybody just to draw a big red X on the calendar of when to tap, but I hope to make you aware of the choices that you need to make, aware of the decisions that are going to come along, and you need to pick which one's best for you. Are you willing to waste some fuel, whether it's wood, gas, whatever you're boiling with, oil, to clean the rig out and be ready to start clean after freeze up? That might be what you got to do. With those choices, you know, we talk about tapping early, tapping late. Typically, we see this, our largest gain in the middle of the season, okay? So whether we tap early and sometimes cut our season short, or we tap late and we cut our season short because we don't get this, typically we're going to gain the steepest area. The shallow areas are going to be what are not in our, you know, we're going to cut one of them out in some cases. Typically early syrup is worth more than late syrup. So that's going to be the one time here where I'm going to recommend tapping early. Is this is normally going to be your higher grade syrup made in the cooler part of the season. But at the same time, having good fresh holes here, we've seen right here, that was important. Having a fresh hole here meant a steeper climb through that whole area where it caught up. So keep that into account too. What do your customers like? Do your customers like early golden syrup because it's cold out? Do they like dark syrup, a little stronger? Keep in mind, this syrup was neither dark nor good. You know, that was a little, So sometimes people don't want to make substandard syrup at the end of the season. They'd rather make early syrup. They're geared, ready for freezes, ready for early sap. Go that direction. So, are there any questions on what I've covered so far? I'm not that good a speaker, and I know you're not all asleep after lunch. Come on. I talk quite a bit about running vacuum around the clock. I know that's difficult in some cases, especially gas-powered vacuum pumps. That gas-powered vacuum pump is running. You got to keep filling it with gas. That gas costs money. But a lot of times, unless it's below 20 degrees, that vacuum really needs to be on. We've had a couple instances this year where when we were watching for leaks, I use a monitoring system, Smart Trek monitoring from H2O and Leader here. Monitor on every single main line. Lines would SAP would stop running. Typically when SAP stops running because of a freeze, we will see main lines, if we have a leak in a line, that air coming in gets colder, we'll freeze up a main line, sensor goes to 0. I know I have a leak. I know where I need to go look. We look for the ice, we look for frost on the outside of lines, we can find that leak. But a sensor goes to 0. So, good way to find leaks I didn't know I had. If I'm looking at my vacuum pump gauge, where most of us look for leaks, our vacuum gets higher during a freeze. Oh, wow, good. Those are leaks freezing up. That's why the vacuum's better. So if you could watch your vacuum gauge at the pump and it does go higher during a freeze, you have leaks. Number's higher, but you still have leaks. But in this case, we had a freeze up, and I had 1 or 2 lines freeze, and I'm not going to worry about them when it's freezing. I make a note. When SAP starts running again, I'm going to go find it. The interesting case was I mentioned that a lot of this freeze up was at mid-20s to low 20s degrees outside. Day 2, got to 27 degrees. 6 more froze up. That's not right. How did SAP freeze up? SAP ran. And it wasn't a case in this case that I had a leak, because I went looking for them. But in this case, we had just enough sap come down the line. Sap got in the line, got really cold, built up a little slush dam, more slush, froze solid, shut the line off. Okay? So even though it never got above 30 degrees, I had sap running. Now, I can't speak for where my main lines froze above that. They didn't have any vacuum on them. But below that, those lines, if that sap ran, was getting pulled to the main line. Pulled to the main line. So that's where it's important. People say, oh, geez, it's snowing. Yeah, it snows in the high 20s quite often. And you can have sap moving in them lines. You want to keep it away from the tap hole. I'm a big proponent of electric vacuum pumps. Not everybody has the ability, but it's real easy to turn the switch on and not have to worry about it. You know, gas-powered pumps are always on your mind. I got to change the oil, got to go buy gas, got to fill them with gas. A whole lot easier just to turn the switch on and leave them run. So I really, have had good luck with electric. And in some cases, we've run electric a long distance relatively and been cheaper than what a year's worth of gas would have cost me at that place. Or even if it takes you 2 or 3 years worth of gas to pay for the electric wire, it's still cheaper. So keep things like that in mind. In the woods, we talk about tap hole sanitation and keeping sap down. Things like check valves all help. Electric extractors also will make a difference in a woods on a small level. You have leaks in your system quite often. You can watch gauges when your mechanical releaser will trip, vacuum will fluctuate if you have leaks because you're overcoming vacuum at different rates. You're refilling a canister, you get some pulsations in your vacuum. That's not good for sap production, So sometimes mechanical releasers will actually pulse your vacuum. Electric extractors, you don't see that. Electric extractors, you're directly connected, constant vacuum, as consistently as possible, so that's important. When you get leaks, get them taken care of. I had 2 instances this year. I'm not normally recommending to go out into the woods during a windstorm. It's not a safe place to be. But as soon as you find it reasonably safe and you've had a windstorm, go out in the woods and find leaks that you may have. With the monitoring system, I had 2 instances where I went to the woods in a windstorm. The first time, I went expecting that my vacuum pump, it must have had lightning, power surge, something, the VFD shut down on the vacuum pump. I was just hoping just to go hit the start button and we'd be running. Unfortunately, when I got there, the vacuum pump was still running and I still had no vacuum. And in that case is when I had the wet dry come apart on me. Luckily, it was a fairly simple fix. I went out in the woods and fixed it. Now, that windstorm was during a sap run, so very important that I was on a low vacuum for as short a period as possible. I would have rathered it never happened, but unfortunately, there's a lot of trees that don't make it through every windstorm. We've all seen that this season. Especially in January, we had a lot of healthy trees uproot, cold, a lot of moisture, south wind in our case. Trees weren't used to that. Biggest problem in my big woods, that big woods is actually in a town called Ashford. And the reason it's called Ashford is there's a whole lot of ash trees. And I don't know about you guys, but them ash trees ain't alive anymore. And they come down every windstorm. So it's a lot of work to keep up on it, but it's an important piece of trying to get tap holes to last as long as possible is, keeping the vacuum up. Now, I was tapped for approximately 2 months on this chart, February 2nd to April 6th. That's a reasonable number for anybody to expect, 2-month season. But there's quite often that, we can make syrup in January for a couple weeks and well into April for a couple weeks. So in my case, I got everything that I was expecting to get, but maybe should have been out a little bit earlier, but like I said, they'll catch you up. So, any questions? Anything anybody would like to add? So.
Would it hurt to wind your VFD down at all during like the freezing times?
Definitely. So both the pumps at that big woods do have VFDs on them. and they're both programmed by vacuum. I will admit that I'm greedy in most cases, and if that vacuum pump slowed down, I can probably get another 1/4 inch of vacuum, so I bump it back up. But yes, absolutely. In the cold times, you do not have to be at 27 inches of vacuum. If it's below freezing, even if it's at that marginal times when the sap ran a little bit, 20 inches is sufficient to keep that sap from going back to the tap hole. So absolutely, slow the pumps down. And that's one thing with gas-powered vacuum pumps. As long as it's a gas directly powered vacuum pump, idle them down. They'll still make vacuum. Use a lot less gas. You'll feel better about it. But leave them on. VFD pumps, slow them down. If you're running an electric vacuum pump off a generator, that's not a good idea. Don't slow that generator motor down because you'll burn out your electric motors because of the hertz difference in the cycle difference on them. But that's a good recommendation to slow it down. Keep some vacuum, but doesn't have to be all the vacuum on a freezing temperature. So one thing that I just thought to add, I recommended, we talked about if things do freeze up, you're keeping, your ROs warm and stuff like that. If you have a pump house where you have an electric extractor, we're keeping those warm also to keep those from freezing. If you can, drain the sap out of those. Get them drained out so it's not going to go bad. Also, keep in mind, we're keeping things like sap extractors and ROs, we're keeping them from freezing. That doesn't mean 75 degrees in the RO room. Some of us like a nice warm room, we go and get warmed up. But bacteria grows a whole lot faster at 75 than it does at 50. So keep that in mind. In some cases, a vacuum pump house or an RO room, 45 to 50 degrees is plenty. We want to keep them from freezing, not, comfortable in our t-shirt. So, anybody else? Okay, any other outside of early tapping that I can answer any questions for?
I think you said you use check valve.
Yes.
Is that a full-size spout, or do they make that?
So, as far as the diameter?
No. Like it's got the burr for the.
So I am using the check valve adapters. Okay, so I have a stubby on my drop line. We pound the adapter into the tree, we tap that in first, put the stubby in, and do that. Now,
How do you find that working?
we find that works the best, and I'll explain exactly. And I actually touched on this earlier, and I'll elaborate a little farther. I mentioned that tapping is the most important step of this process. We need to take our time, we need to do a good job, okay? So for me, the idea of having to carry spouts and a tool to push the spout on, and a drill, and a hammer seemed like a lot. And I'm pushing a spout on, that takes an extra step. By tapping with stubbies and adapters, it allows my guys, when we tap, we carry spouts, a drill, and a hammer. I don't need any tools. We carry flagging tape so that we can flag a repair if need be, so the next guy coming through with the tools can fix it. So that's the way we operate. So for when we tap, it's real easy, just drill, adapter, tap, 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 stubby, 1-2 taps with the hammer. One tap is enough. We found that the first tap's kind of just helping you aim, so tap, tap, second tap sets it, and we've had very good luck with that. Also comes in, and again, that just is one less step while I'm tapping, meaning that I can take my time to do a better job. I'm not as rushed because I have one less step. With the check valve adapters, we did struggle for a while getting them separated when we pulled taps. Fair problem. Couple different options for tools out there. The new one from Leader H2O with the spout separator. There's some for demonstration out on the tables. There's a cross, 2 claws that kind of pass by each other. I have yet to meet a stubby and adapter that we can't get apart. I actually had my 5 and my 7-year-old out with me for a little while pulling some taps just to keep them occupied one afternoon in the one woods that's close to home, and they wanted to try that. And neither of them had any problem separating even the most stubborn stubbies and adapters. And they're, 5 and 7 years old. So that is certainly a difference. You know, having the right tools to use those adapters. Making sure they're set completely is a big difference. You know, we did have one year after we struggled getting them apart. Some of my guys that helped me tap also helped me pull taps. They remembered struggling getting them apart, so when it come to tap them together, they were pretty light with the hammer because they remembered last year. Freezing temperatures, we had quite a bit come apart. I will admit that this season, after using separator tools last year, telling the guys make sure they're set all the way, they weren't worried at all about setting them. Out of my 4,200 taps that were all adapters and stubbies this year, I don't think I fixed one after a freeze that was a stubby that come out of the adapter. I do have one other guy that finds leaks for me. I'd have to ask him, but I don't think he had any either. So stubbies and adapters separating in a freeze is not an issue, as long as they've been set correctly. If you're under driving your stubby, obviously it can fall apart. But when done correctly, not an issue. We had zero problems pulling them apart at the end of the season, so not a big deal. So.
Have you ever, I know, I guess it's probably related to how well they're put together, but question like leakage, like vacuum leaks around?
Yeah, so that's actually his question. He's asking about tap leakage around the tap hole. That is probably one of the biggest differences I've seen in the last 2 years. We've had a drastic decrease in leaking tap holes, whether it's vacuum or sap coming out, if you will. And the biggest difference that I can come up with in the last 2 years is that we've started using the exact tap, that liter evaporator and H2O now cell. Again, demonstrations out on the tables. Remember to take the one with me. The DeWalt's actually mine. I brought it back with me to use. When I leave this afternoon, I need to take it with me. But that is an amazing tool for tap hole, making sure our systems are tight. We used 2 of the prototypes last year in testing. I bought another unit this year. I had 3 drills out all season long. Anytime I did have leaking tap holes, whether it was vacuum or et cetera, it was a main line that I knew somebody tapped without the exact tap. Extremely noticeable difference. I ran better vacuum this year than I ever have, as far as consistently. And I think it has to do with those drills. And basically what it is, anybody that's not familiar with it, I don't have one in front of me, I apologize. It's an adapter that goes on your drill. We have them to fit DeWalt, we have them to fit Milwaukee right now. It goes on the end of your drill, and it will help guide you straight into the hole and straight back out of the hole. Now, it sounds simple that we can drill a hole in a tree, but realistically, when you think about where you're holding your hand in relationship to where your drill bit is, when you push, this is actually, it's exaggerated, but you're actually tilting upward. You're pushing on the bottom. A good sharp drill bit's going to pull itself into the tree. We need to pull back. When we pull back, it's going to tip down slightly. What does that tipping mean? We have a round drill bit. We have a round spout that we'd like to put into that hole. We just made an oval hole. Because of our wiggle, we've made an oval hole. Okay? That tapping tool is guiding me with feet that are pressed on the tree straight in and straight out. Now, the other big piece of that is how it allows me to come straight out easily is there's a stop built in. Okay, a good sharp drill bit draws us into the tree. We need to stop that draw, so we pull back on it. This drill, as you're drilling in, hits its stop. When it hits the stop, the drill bit, we're still pushing, but the drill bit turns a couple times and breaks that where it's clawing itself in. Pops right back out. Spring loaded, comes right back out. My holes are rounder. Not noticeable. It's nothing you can see with the naked eye. But my tap holes have been tighter. My vacuum has been better. I've had less leaking, whether vacuum and or sap. And I think that's a big difference. I really, really do. If there's any tool out here that is worth its weight, it's that. It's not that much heavier to carry. You may pick it up on the table and go, oh, wow, that's heavy. Both those drills have 5 amp hour batteries. That's the weight. Pop the battery out. I guarantee you that tool doesn't weigh anything. Pick up just the tool in the box on the table. It's not that heavy. Couple benefits of that beyond drilling a better tap hole. That better tap hole is going to be a better production, more sap, less leaks, which means better vacuum and more sap. But beyond that, just user comfort. When I tap personally, I hook the tool hook on my belt, okay? So typically the drill's hanging down, and my old pair of Carhartts right here has a whole big thin area on it where the drill bit's rubbed up against my knee. I now have a tool, a cage, if you will, around that drill bit. My new Carhartts still look new, thank God. If I drop the drill, I don't break the drill bit off because the cage protects the drill bit, okay? My cousin, when he taps, he likes to hook the drill in the crook of his arm here. And when he's doing his thing, he holds the drill in his arm. Quite often you hit the trigger, drill bit turns. He's wound his coat up in the drill bit. Not an issue anymore. He hooks that in his arm. It actually, between the tool on the truck side and the battery, it balances in his arm he doesn't have to crook it on his arm anymore. He can just hook it and it stays in his arm when he's carrying stuff and pounding and tapping, etc. It stays right in his arm. He loves it just because of that reason. You know, it also takes out another factor. One of the things I talked about is taking your time when you're drilling holes, okay? Making sure you're doing a good job. There's a list of things when we're drilling holes that are important to us drilling holes to making sure that we're doing the best job we can. Trying our hardest, if we don't have an accessory to help us drill a hole, we need to try to make sure we're straight. 2 hands trying to guide it correctly so that we're not wiggling too much. Concerned about depth, concerned about, you know, making sure the speed's right, everything like that. That drill takes all that out. It controls the depth. It controls the angle. It controls the wiggle that we're worried about. Now all I'm worried about is the most important piece, finding a good spot. That's the important thing. You drill too close to an old tap hole, you just ruin the season for that hole. Not going to produce. And with a big tubing system, you don't notice it. If it was buckets, you'd figure out pretty quick that that spout's not working this year. But in a tubing system, it's hooked into the rest of them, you don't notice. But all I'm worried about now is getting through the snow if I have it, drilling that hole in a good spot, and worried about pounding that spout out. And at the right, you know, not overdriving, stuff like that. Rather than remembering 7 or 8 things, I'm remembering 3 or 4. So it allows me to focus on the important things, and that's where that drill makes a person just more productive. You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't seem as stressful. It's crazy to think, but at the end of the day, after using a drill like that, it's very effective. It does make the job easier. You don't notice the weight, I promise you.
Tight holes and I guess ball valves reduce the amount of mold that's going to be in your drop line.
The check valves?
Check valves and the drill, the combination. How's that reflect to the amount of mold that you'll have?
So I will say this year when we washed, there was a noticeably less amount of bacteria that we noticed in the lines. I'm not going to say that that was all the drill and the spouts. It probably is a large factor, but temperature of the season will change that more so than a spout or a drill. We did have early here, the first week of March, we did have some pretty warm temperatures that probably would have grew a lot of bacteria. We did have enough sap flow during those times to help keep that out. The last week of our season was actually quite cool. We didn't see temperatures much over 50 degrees. So I would say the limited bacteria I seen this year had more to do with that, to be honest with you. But I will say that, you know, if you happen to find that leaky spout or a squirrel chew that's been ignored, you'll see a lot of bacteria in those holes. So definitely air coming in, there's bacteria in the air. We're breathing it right now, folks. So that's where that air becomes an issue. And I've noticed quite often where you get a squirrel chew, you got a lot of bacteria inside your lines, if you don't get to it right away. But as a habit, I try to get them fixed, you know. So, but late in the season, you tend to forget about them.
Just back to the tapping unit, so it's Milwaukee, DeWalt, is there a difference between the two makes of
So
drills? Does
basically,
that
the
be-
tools made, so the difference between the Milwaukee and the DeWalt tools, basically they're using the same platform. It all depends on the mounting method. So on the DeWalt drills, we fit, I believe it's 6 different models of DeWalt drills that have a ring or a boss near the clutch that's designed to mount a side handle. So there's a ring of metal that we can clamp onto to mount the drill. Makes it very simple. There's not any bulky cables or anything like that that we're trying to tighten up and they get frayed and they cut your hand or anything like that. We're using existing points on the drill on certain models. So it will not fit any DeWalt. I'm sorry, but it won't. There's certain models that it will. Most of them are hammer drill models. On the Milwaukee, it's exactly the same. Now, it's the same idea, but it's a different mounting method. So on the Milwaukees, they don't have that ring. They actually have 2 grooves on either side, or pockets, that a handle would grip into, and we're using those points to clamp onto the Milwaukee drill. Now, that gives us a couple great options when it comes to these drills. Yes, we only fit certain models, but it makes the tool easy to come off. Okay, so we don't have to cut a cable or unscrew and loosen up and everything else. One Allen screw, tool comes off the drill. So if I want to use it for something else in the off season, I can use it for something else. It's not in my way. The other big benefit of when you're adapting these onto tools is some of our competition wants you to take the chuck off their drill and then use their special adapter, which is fine. But if it's important to you, you've just voided the warranty on your DeWalt or your Milwaukee drill by taking the chuck off. We can leave the standard chuck on. And by leaving the standard chuck on, that now means I can run any drill bit. They're adjustable for short bits. They're adjustable for long bits. The competition's version of our exact tap is special. It has to be a certain length drill bit to use their adapter and etc. And you can't switch sizes. If I want to run 1/4-inch bits in the morning in a small woods with smaller taps and then maybe want to switch to 19/64 or 5/16, I just change drill bits. I adjust the tool. I can change the length of the bolts to adjust for different lengths drill bits, and I can keep right on going. I can adjust those bolts to adjust my angle if I wish. Very simple to use, very easy. In fact, the person that designed the exact tap that we are selling today was a pretty big customer of the competition and got aggravated with their method and designed his own that was better. So they both do the same thing, I'll admit. I wouldn't say that one is in production noticeably better than the other. There's creature comforts on both that are sometimes better or worse. But it comes down to user friendliness, how easy it is to mount, how easy is it to adjust, how easy is it to change, and then take off, have more options. So, but, yep. So,
What are you doing when you're tapping the exact tap? And not every tree is perfect. Not every tree is standing perfectly straight, perfectly round. You got one that's leaning this way, and now if you go on the exact tap, and you're tapping this side, it's extremely
yep.
low. If you're going the other way, you've got a hole sticking up in the air.
Agreed, and I don't normally like tapping uphill. I've never let the angle of the spout be a big issue. And I think in some cases, and this is definitely a problem on soft maples where they grow in bunches mainly on angles. But I think, and this is my opinion on this, that drilling perpendicular to the tree might be more important than the angle of the spout compared to level. Okay, and what I mean by that is if our tree is here, our sapwood is that first couple layers. I want that spout to be perpendicular so that I am getting a good seal. If you're drilling on an angle, for whatever reason that may be, you're not sealing as consistently as you should be. Anytime I see a spout in my woods that's leaking, 9 times out of 10, it's at some weird angle for some reason, whether it was a branch or a weird like that. I will admit that a spout on a leaning tree that's kind of going up for sap to go, that's not ideal, but I think that perpendicular hole is a better sealing hole, and that's my opinion. So, just my take on that. Sometimes you've got to pick the lesser of two evils, if you will. So, one thing on all this, folks, I normally start some of my talks with that, and I'm going to end this one because it's time for our next class. Everything I've shared with you today, my advice, it's my opinion, okay? Works for me. You guys are here to make your own decisions, make your own opinions, okay? I'm going to group myself in this, but it goes for anything that you see on YouTube, anything that you see in a research book, okay? Even professional research that is done at a college or something like that might be biased one way or the other, depending on who's paying for the research. I'm obviously here in front of you as from leader of Evaporator and H2O Innovation. Okay, I love their products, but I have reason why I like them, why I use them. Somebody else might have a reason why they like theirs. Make your own opinion, okay? An Exact Tap is a $500 tool that goes on your DeWalt drill. Does somebody with 100 taps justify that? Not really. But can you also take that and go, wow, geez, it's important to make a really good hole. I'm going to change the way I drill in order to make a really good hole. I don't need the expensive tool, but I'm going to take my time. I'm going to use 2 hands. I'm going to hold my drill differently. You didn't spend $500, but you've improved your method. Okay? So, everything that you see, not just what you've heard here today, everything you see is an opinion. Figure out what works best for each individual system. No different than when to drill holes. I hope nobody here today just thinks that they need to go drill holes on January 27th, because everybody in here needs a different date, because everybody's system is different. So, anybody else? I thank you folks for coming today. Hope you enjoyed. And when you're headed home, have a safe drive home.
Thank you.
Nick?
Yes, sir.
I was going to ask you,